Good morning, everyone. How are you doing here? Michael Zuber from One Rental at a Time. And as mentioned in our daily financial news, we have the one, the only Dana from Himlane. How you doing, Dana?
Great. Thanks, Michael, for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Folks, if you don't know, I've recently spent some money. I'm very cheap, but I just spent some money cleaning up the descriptions of all these YouTube videos. And one thing I want to call you attention to is there is a section of discounts. One rental at a time is nearly 20,000 subscribers now. And with that weight comes discounts. And one of them is Himlane. You've got to check it out below, 30-day trial. And if you get it, you get 20% off the first year. So first off, Dana, thank you for that. That was very nice of you.
Great. Yeah, no, we're excited to have people check out what we're working on and how we're helping real estate investors.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things we're going to do today is we're going to respond to questions and comments, right? We did a fair housing video. I think it was a month ago, and we hit it at the 10,000 foot level. And what we're going to do now is we're going to do a couple of topics on fair housing that really self managers or, mom and pop that are managing themselves really got to pay attention to. You gave some great examples about, ads and other things that come get you. But there's other aspects of fair housing, and one of them is reasonable accommodations. And again, folks, if this is not an area I am deep on because I pay a property manager, but a lot of you want to do self-management. So you've got to pay attention in Himlane, and Dana is the person I come to. So Dana, what can you tell us about reasonable accommodation? What does it mean? What steps you got to take? All that good stuff.
Yeah. So first of all, I would say if you are self-managing, your landlord, like the biggest thing to know is you have to just be operationally focused. The type of person that when you get an email, you respond to it. If you're the type of person who waits 3 weeks to respond, probably should hire a full service manager, right? But if you're one of those people who's task oriented, you want to get through all your emails, make sure you respond to people. Being a landlord can really work to your advantage, especially from the perspective of control and transparency of your assets. So basically, with reasonable accommodations, it's to accommodate those who have disabilities. What people forget so often is it's not just physical. It can also be emotional.
Yeah.
So you can't ask questions if you see someone who has a disability. You can't say, well, why are you in that wheelchair or anything like that, right? Like there is nothing that you can say about it. But there may be situations where people ask for an accommodation. It might be during the application process. It might be when they've already moved in. And the most important thing is to take these super, super seriously and document everything. Don't get into their personal life and ask why they need an emotional support animal. Don't, ask, don't mention something like, oh, I only do online applications. You can't have an offline application. If they need a paper application, make sure you have one on file. And like us as a tech company, have one on file just for that reason of making sure you're accommodating in these situations. So I think it's really important to note that. And then a lot of people ask us, what qualifies for reasonable accommodations? How much do I have to accommodate? And like the general rule of thumb with it is that this person should be able to enjoy the amenities, the community, their living, their housing at an equal opportunity as those who don't have a disability. So an example of that is, someone with a disability needs an upfront parking spot. And you say, well, no, you were assigned to spot 10, which is way in the back corner. If they're not going to enjoy the space as much, it's difficult for them to get to their unit or whatever it is. You do need to make that accommodation and give them an upfront spot. So a lot of times people forget about, they get into the nosiness of like, oh, am I going to have to make this accommodation? Why? Let me dig in more. And just remember, you're a professional. You want to be very professional. You don't want to be nosy about it. And it even goes to the point, like one of the ones that came up recently is hoarding. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And hoarding is a disability. You can't call them hoarders. You see the show Hoarders and you kind of think like, oh my gosh, people live this way. But that's even, it can be a health hazard, but you can't just serve an eviction notice and say you're out in 3 days unless you get rid of all of your stuff. you have to make reasonable accommodations. You have to put a schedule out to how can we work through this, maybe get them a therapist so they have longer time to accommodate it. But you can't just go out there and say, nope, I'm going to treat this like any other situation. So that's really important. Another one that I see come up a lot is marijuana.
I bet.
And recreational use is different, right? But in the marijuana, it's like if you're in a 2-unit, 4-unit, 20-unit, neighbors are complaining about the smell. How can you make reasonable accommodations? Potentially recommend edibles. Something else, right, to make it where they can still enjoy the place and actually have those reasonable accommodations. So that's kind of from my end. I don't know, Michael, you might actually have some stories as well.
Yeah, reasonable accommodations are something that comes up, and I don't know it by that name, but I have several stories. Like I had a house one time where a tenant moved in. They were there 5 or 6 years, and then, life happens and they end up in a wheelchair, and the house has always had stairs, right? I think it was 2 steps, maybe it was 3. And that just became a non-starter. Right. And, we had to build a ramp, right? Reasonable accommodations. And we, and oh, by the way, we had to build a ramp that was, a certain way and had to be, it was a whole deal to do that. And it wasn't cheap, by the way, either. So again, those are things that sometimes come around. Another one is the emotional support animals, right? There's actually a process for it, right? A lot of people there for a while were getting these certificates claiming emotional support, frankly, for dangerous breeds. And then you have that whole, like just use pit bulls as an example, right? If you have somebody that's claiming a pit bull as an emotional support animal, you're like, what's going on, right? So there is a certification. You got to get licensed or whatever it is with the city. Can't show any aggressive behavior. You just have to, as a landlord, realize, like you said, you're in the service business.
Yeah.
And the tenant has rights, as do other tenants if you're in a 12 or 14 or 20 unit. But yeah, some of these may feel like headaches, but don't act like they're headaches. Deal with it. Work through the process, because I promise you, if you get got by fair housing, it will be a lot worse.
Yeah. And the emotional support animals is a good one, to go back to that point of professional. A lot of tenants hear from their friends, oh, well, just get this letter online that you pay like $20 for, and you're going to be able to get your emotional support animal into the property. And I found kind of 2 things with that. One, if you allow pets, except for aggressive breeds, because your insurance won't cover it, most likely you can check your insurance. If you say that you allow for pets, it reduces that emotional support, those emotional support animal claims. And then 2, if someone does come to you with an emotional support animal, you go, great, here's my documentation and my process of how it works. I need to see the letter. I need to verify the license of the doctor. Right. You can't ask like, oh, well, what is the problem with you? Right. But you can say, I can verify that this is a licensed doctor in this state. And then here's my reasonable accommodation form for the emotional support animal. Usually people who are trying to get around it, who actually don't have the disability, but they heard from some friend at dinner, usually they get scared and they're like, oh, great, let me go to the landlord who's not professional and let me tell them that I have an emotional support animal. So you can just semi get around that by just showing you're very professional and you have a
that's the key
process.
Is you have a process and a procedure in place. It's not one-off. If you treat things one-off as a self-managed landlord, you're going to be in trouble.
Yep. Definitely.
Very cool. Well, we got another topic on this, tenant occupancy 2 and 1. So we will talk about that in our second episode. Thanks, Dana.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael.